until I remembered a time when I kind of was trapped in a bad situation in a truck, having to help out some other GIs that were there. But I had never related being stuck in traffic with actually on a subconscious level that I interpreted that, my body interpreted that as the threat of death, which was actually going on. So once I understood that, even though traffic jams can still tick me off, I'm able to deal with that, or being stuck in traffic. I'm able to deal with that a lot more easily, and I'm also able to, be a lot more gentle with myself with regards to that. A lot of post-traumatic stress has to do with loss, and most of the time, whether loss of innocence, loss of trust, all of those things. And until one is able to actually process that, they're going to deal with that for their entire lives. I know that I've actually heard several other other veterans say this, that talking about it felt to me like if I actually let out all the pain, all the grief, that it would be like stepping off a cliff, that I literally would never come back. I would lose my mind, and I would be stuck in that place of pain and grief forever. I would never come back. So it took me years to actually, and I've actually heard other people say exactly the same thing, but I heard that in a group, so it made me feel better. But it took me years before I actually got to the point where I finally just said, I'm going to let this out. And I did. And there were a lot of tears, and there was a lot of screaming and yelling, and within the context of a group now, in a safe environment. There wasn't any kind of violence or anything like that. But what I discovered was, instead of falling off of a cliff, which is what I was convinced would happen, it was really like stepping off a curb onto the street. It was about a 6-inch drop as opposed to a 600-foot drop. And that is really the only way to really deal. Now, there's many different, some people take antidepressants. Some people go to groups and take antidepressants. Every person is an individual. Again, it's a scale. Post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorder is a continuum. So let's say we have an imaginary scale of 1 to 10. Most people think of PTSD as the most extreme on that scale, as a 9 or a 10, where the person is really, not able to deal with things. Whereas the reality is most people probably fall between a 4 and an 8, depending upon what is going on. And I remember what I was going to say about length of exposure. Okay, so I'm going to backtrack to a few minutes ago, and thank you for your patience. So think of this imaginary scale of 1 to 10. Now, most people walk around, somewhere between 1 and 4, maybe 5, whatever. And let's say they have a traumatic event like a car crash, or a member of the family dies. They may jump up into that 7, 8, 9 scale, but when they're able to get through the stressor, they return to 1 through 4, which is what normal is. For combat veterans, or for women that have been in long-term abusive relationships, we're always at 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 in terms of fear. But as long as you're in that situation, as long as I was in Vietnam, there was never a time where I wasn't aware that I could die at any minute. So my new normal, quote unquote, on that scale of 1 to 10, my new normal became a 5 or 6. Sure. So I thought I was being normal, when in reality my normal was at a stress level or a stressor that was much higher than the person, the quote-unquote normal person who's not suffering from that. And that's one of the, if an individual thinks that their reactions and their emotions are quote-unquote normal, they've actually forgotten what normal was before they were in that stressful situation. And that was really an eye-opener for me. It's like, oh, okay, well, gosh, maybe, and I always thought that I was at 2 or 3 when I'm actually been at 5 or 6. It may be a simplistic way of putting it, but I think the point is clear. The one thing that I do know for myself, and this has been proven to be true, is that counseling does help. Any individual that thinks that they are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, I would strongly encourage them, especially any veterans that might actually happen to see this, to please get in a group. Now, in the vet centers, that I've been to, it's been a while since I've been back, so I don't know if they still do it this way, but they had 2 different kinds of group. They had a therapy group, which was usually a closed group, age of 12 to 13, and people had a couple of weeks to decide whether they want to do it. But once the group was set, that was it. Nobody else was allowed into the group. So there was, over a several-week period of time, the ability to trust was built up with other individuals. But then there's also what are called support groups, or what they called support groups, which go on for any length of time, whether it's months, sometimes even years, where people can come and go as they please. It's not necessary to show up. Usually what happens is that the same folks tend to show up, but a support group is different than a therapy group. I would say that I spent probably a cumulative total of maybe somewhere between 6 to 8 years in groups. And I can honestly say that they genuinely helped the quality of my life. And that's really kind of the key. It has to do with the quality of life. I took a grief and loss class in college, and I remember, I'll never forget my teacher saying that grief unprocessed lies buried alive in inner space. And it just struck me, because people that have been through traumatic experiences walk around with that grief, because we have been wounded. When somebody that we love abuses us, it hurts. What's wrong with me? There must be something wrong with me. Why am I not lovable? And at least for me, with regards to combat, there certainly was grief around the loss of innocence. Kind of hard to be naive after being in combat. And with somebody who has been raped or abused, there is grief around that. It really does help to get counseling. And again, most people don't think they need it because they're functioning. And that can be very frustrating from a counselor's point of view. So I've been babbling here for I don't know how long, and hopefully it's not quite babbling.
You haven't been babbling, actually. It's been interesting. So what types of symptoms still, come to the surface for you that might affect you?
I mean, in terms of when I'm aware of people, well, I still have a really hard time with July 4th with fireworks.
That I can understand.
And I used to get very down on myself about that. It's like, well, it's been 30 years or whatever since I've been to Vietnam. I should be able to deal with this. I remember one July 4th, I actually forced myself to go outside. Once I went to a big gathering in the town where I live in, and it was great. But about halfway through it, I could not handle it. I had to get out of there, because there were kids running around with sparklers, and there were screams, and there were fireworks going off, and the sounds of war. The sounds of war definitely can still get to me. And I really try to force myself to say, okay, well, I'm going to be normal, and I'm going to enjoy this, or at least accept it. And I wasn't able to. And then I went through several months of feeling bad about myself, that somehow that I was screwed up. Another July 4th, I said, okay, I'm going to go sit out on my front porch, and I am going to force myself to listen to these things and tell myself I'm safe, I'm not in a war zone anymore, nothing's going to happen to me, and so on. And so I actually got through the night, but it was miserable, and I was lying to myself. So I finally got to the point where I just said, you know what? I can't handle July 4th. I'm okay. It doesn't mean that I'm screwed up. That's just the way that it is. So I gave myself permission to not go out on July 4th, because it was just too uncomfortable for me. I know in, 1991 when we had the first invasion of Iraq, I believe it was 91, when that came on TV, I didn't sleep for 2 days because I was back in, just kept on thinking about the troops and what the troopies were going through and what they were experiencing. And it brought back some of the nightmares I used to have around Vietnam, and that's one of the indicators for post-traumatic stress disorder is having recurring nightmares. My particular nightmare was, and I had this for years and years and years. Thank goodness it's been years. I think it's been over 10 years since I've actually had this dream. But in this dream, I would be in the jungle with a bunch of my buddies. We were on patrol, and it was, very tense and very scary. And then we came through the jungle, and we would emerge into this clearing. And we came into the clearing, and somebody said, "The war is over. The war is over." And so we all put our rifles down because the war was over, and we were all very happy that we could finally go home. And as soon as we put our rifles down, all of a sudden, Viet Cong stood up from all over this field and started firing at us. We were ambushed.
Wow.
So it went from being on guard, being fearful, to joy and relief that the war was over, to being killed because we had put our guns down. So I'm glad that as a traffic jams, which we've already talked about, the sound of children screaming is, I'm not talking about screaming in like pain or horror or anything like that. Obviously, anybody's going to react to that. But just children screaming, being playful. And it's not, I don't run away. It's not like listening to fireworks, but it's still, for whatever reason, it just makes me tense up, and I think that has something to do with screams of pain that I heard, when I was in war, because I have been through the experience of losing a wife and a child, and I'm certainly not the only one that has been through that experience, but anytime I see anything on TV that has to do with the loss of a child, it can bring that up. When I get what we call PTSD, that's just a non-clinical vet term, when it's going through a PTSD bout, we would just call it PTSD out. So when I PTSD out for whatever reason, which fortunately is not that often, my particular thing is I tend to isolate. And that doesn't mean cut myself off from all communications, but it's just much safer indoors. I'm not out driving around or anything else. I'm quite comfortable at home. Now, I tend to be a homebody anyway, but that increases when I'm having some kind of PTSD reaction. One of the enormous benefits for me is that I was, with the knowledge that I had of learning how I would respond to different stimuli, I was able to understand what I was feeling, and with the understanding of what I was feeling, I was able to accept it. So, in other words, the pain and the stress from that was greatly reduced. People, a lot of people know, is PTSD curable? And the answer is yes, absolutely. It depends upon the individual. I've had a lot more stressors in my life than the average person has, but I'm still I'm a good person and a walking, talking, functioning human being, and I don't think most people would go, wow, that dude is really he's got PTSD really really bad. So those are some of the ones that come to mind in terms of what stimuli there are that are out there. I've learned not to watch war flicks. Can't stand them anymore. Other than I did watch Platoon. I did watch Born on the 4th of July.